So this is the second of two videos going through some prerequisite skills that you're going to need for our unit on probability. And so in this section, we're going to look at adding and subtracting fractions and multiplying and dividing fractions, just to remind you about the details associated with that. So I'm going to start with adding and subtracting fractions because students typically find this harder. Why? Because you need to make sure that you have a common denominator. So what do I mean by that? That means that the bottom half of the fraction needs to be the same before we can add them. So let me show you how I would typically do this. I would be saying, well, what is a number that both 2 and 3, okay, my denominators, can be divided into? Now, ideally, you're looking for the smallest number because then you won't have to reduce your fraction at the end. But a quick trick, if you're unsure of things, is to simply multiply the denominators together to get your common denominator. And so that tells me that I'm looking at changing both of these. 2 times 3 is 6 to 6. So now, but you don't need to do that. Sometimes that will give you much larger numbers, so not always ideal, but that is a quick trick if you're stuck trying to figure out what the common denominator is. So now I need to say to myself, well, what did I have to do to 2 to get 6? I said 2 times 3. Whatever I do to the bottom of my fraction, to the denominator, I need to do to the top of my fraction, to my numerator. So that's going to give me 1 times 3, which is 3. And that should make sense, right? Like 3 out of 6 is the same as 1 out of 2. So now I'm going to repeat the same process with my other fraction. I say, well, what did I need to multiply 3 by to get 6? So 3 times 2 will give me 6. And I'm going to do the same thing to my numerator, which will give me a numerator of 2 on that second fraction. I have my common denominator, I'm pretty much set to go, right? Because, what this is actually saying is I want to know if I have 3 pieces out of 6, and then I add 2 pieces out of 6. How many pieces out of 6 do I have, right? Well, I'm going to have 3 plus 2 pieces out of 6, so 5 out of 6. And I'm done. So let's take a look at another problem, and I'd like you to give it a try on your own, and then what we can do is take it up together. One small note, I want to make sure that when you look at your final answer, when you've added your fractions or subtracted your fractions, just double check that you cannot reduce any longer, so make sure it's in reduced form so you don't have to reduce that fraction anymore. And I can tell when I look at 5 and I look at 6, there is no number that both of those can be divided by to reduce that fraction. Here's an example I'd like for you to try on your own. 5/6 minus 3/4. So again, remember you have to get a common denominator, and then you're going to add and subtract your numerator, but keep the same denominator. I'm going to pause the video and resume when you're ready. Okay, so I can look at these two numbers and multiply them to get a common denominator of 24. And that will work great, but I'm actually seeing that there is a lower value that both of these can be divided into, and that is 12. So I'm going to use 12 as my common denominator here, and I'm going to get it all set up. But if you use 24, that will also work. You may just have to reduce your fraction near the end. So when I look at this, I'm saying to myself, well, what did I need to do to 6 to get 12? I needed to multiply by 2. Whatever I do to my denominator, I'm going to do to my numerator. And that's going to give me 10 over 12. Now, applying the same principles to my second fraction in the question, I'm going to say to myself, well, what did I need to do to 4 to get 12? Well, I needed to multiply by 3. Whatever I do to my denominator, I need to repeat to my numerator. And so that's going to give me 9 out of 12. And now I'm good to go. And so I look at this and I say, well, I have 10 pieces out of 12, and I want to take away 9 pieces out of 12. How many pieces out of 12 do I have left? I have 1 piece out of 12 left. Now, here's a question. Now, if you by chance instead had 24, your work would have looked like this. It would have been like 20 over 24 minus 18 over, 24. And then you would have ended up with 2 out of 24. And hopefully you would recognize that that's a fraction that can be reduced to lower terms. Okay, so now I want you to stop the video, take a look at the worksheet on adding and subtracting fractions, and give those questions a try. There should be an answer key as well on Google Classroom for you to check your answers as you go along. The skill that you're going to need for this unit is knowing how to multiply fractions. So the beautiful thing about when you're multiplying fractions is you don't need a common denominator. You're simply going to multiply numerator with numerator and denominator with denominator. And then as always, we're going to look to reduce our fractions. So let's go ahead and do that. So I know that 2 times 5 is 10. And I know that 3 times 6 is 18. Now, both top and bottom are even numbers, so I'm going to try to divide them by 2 and see where I get. So that will give me 5 out of 9, and I can reduce no longer, so I am done. So I would like for you to try this example on your own, see how you do, and then pause the video and then try it, and then resume when you're ready to check to see if your answer is correct. So when I look at this problem, I can see that I'm going to multiply my numerator with my numerator, and that's going to give me 6. And then I'm going to multiply my denominator with my denominator. And that's going to give me 40. Now again, I see that both of these are even numbers, so I'm going to try to reduce that by dividing by 2 to start. And that may not do it, but it may just reduce it enough. So let's see. We're going to try this out. 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. 40 divided by 2 gives me 20. And I know that 3 and 20 don't have a number that both can be divided into. And so I am done. I've multiplied these fractions. So now what I'd like you to do is try the worksheet on Google Classroom to get you practicing multiplying these fractions, and make sure you're checking your answer key as you go along.